Watched the champagne glass hit the marble floor before I even heard it. 20 seconds earlier, my own mother had told their biggest client that I was just a disappointment. She didn't know the jet behind her, the one the client was about to board, was mine. I stood at the edge of the terminallights.com, collected every word she said, carving deeper than she realized. Then the client turned, eyes narrowing as he looked at me. Wait, this is your daughter's company. And in that moment, everything they'd built on lies finally began to crack. It's me, Melania Collins, in this story. And if you're re-wondering how a daughter ends up standing across from her own parents at a private terminal, listening to them downgrade her life's work to a stranger, well, that road started long before the champagne shattered. I grew up in an immaculate house outside Boston, the kind where the carpets never wrinkled and the dinner conversations felt more like performance reviews. My parents, Edward and Vivian Collins, ran a consulting firm and believed children were assets to be molded, not people to be known. Dad taught me how to calculate profit margins before I could do long division. Mom taught me how to sit, speak, and smile in ways that made the right people approve. But no one taught me how to be myself. When I was 8, sitting in the backseat of my father's car, I saw a private jet rise straight into a blue winter sky. Something in my chest tightened to wonder. Maybe freedom? And I whispered, I want to fly one day. Dad didn't look up from his call. Mom said pilots were just drivers with better uniforms. Still, that spark stayed with me. I hid aviation magazines under my mattress, checked out books about aircraft from the school library, drew runway layouts on the backs of homework sheets. Meanwhile, my parents had already written my future. I would inherit their firm, marry someone from their circle, and maintain the Collins brand. Every step of my childhood reinforced that script. If I brought home an A-, Dad hired a tutor before dinner. If I asked to join soccer or art club, Mom reminded me that successful families don't raise distracted children. Even my bedroom felt curated framed certificates, leadership awards, shelves of business books chosen by my parents, not me. The only person who ever saw the real me was Jenna Brooks, my friend from high school. Her dad, Captain Reynolds, was a commercial pilot who told stories that lit something inside me. He once said, aviation makes room for people who chase the sky. I held on to that line like a secret promise, but promises didn't stand a chance in my house. When I applied to aviation management programs behind my parents' backs, Dad found the letters and tore them in half, while Mom compared me again to some Ivy League golden child she'd met at a country club. That night, I realized something important. Love in my family came with conditions, and I would never meet them. I didn't know then that I'd spend the next decade trying anyway. But every story has a turning point, even mine. By the time I left for college, the tension in our house felt like a low hum. Constant, draining, impossible to escape. My parents insisted I major in business, so I did on paper. But the electives I chose told a different story. Logistics, operations, transportation systems, quiet rebellions disguised as compliance. Professor Henry Walsh spotted it immediately. After class one day, he said, "You think like someone who belongs in aviation? Why aren't you there?" I didn't know how to explain 22 years of pressure in one sentence. So I just shrugged. He nodded like he understood anyway. That one conversation became a doorway. Internships, contacts, guidance. My secret life finally had air to breathe. Of course, secrets don't stay hidden forever in a Collins household. Every break home turned into an interrogation. Mom would ask about my GPA just loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Dad would ask which consulting clubs I joined. And when I didn't answer fast enough, he'd sigh like I was throwing away the family legacy. They kept comparing me to other kids. Kids with the right path, the right internships, the right futures. It was like they couldn't see me without a checklist. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror and wondered if I still recognized the person they were trying to build. After graduation, they offered me a position at their firm. An extravagant salary, a clear promotion track, everything a person should want. The same afternoon, I got a modest operations job at a regional airline. Low pay, long hours, night shifts, but it felt like oxygen. So I took it. My parents reacted like I'd committed treason. Dad said I was throwing away generational progress. Mom said she couldn't believe her daughter wanted to work at an airport counter like a teenager. When I moved out of their guest house and into a tiny apartment overlooking the runway, Dad didn't speak to me for months. But I stayed. I learned everything. Scheduling, dispatch crew, management, compliance. I memorized the sound of jet engines, the rhythm of a bustling terminal, how it felt to watch something heavy lift effortlessly into the sky. For the first time in my life, I loved waking up. Still, the undercurrent remained. When I visited home for holidays, I overheard Mom telling relatives I was still figuring things out. Dad would talk about me like I wasn't in the room. The breaking point came years later on a day that looked perfectly ordinary at a private terminal where I stood reviewing a flight manifest and heard my mother's voice before I saw her. And with one sentence, everything finally snapped. I didn't mean to overhear it. I was reviewing final prep for a morning departure, going over catering notes with one of my staff, when I caught a familiar cadence behind me. My mother's clipped vowels, the way she stretched certain words to sound refined. I froze before I even processed the sentence. "She's just a disappointment," she told the man beside her, Leonard Hayes, an international CEO, whose contract could transform any aviation company. "Our daughter works at the airport now. We try not to talk about it." My chest tightened, not from shock because I'd heard versions of that line my entire life, but from how effortlessly she said it like it was fact. Like my entire career had been reduced to a family embarrassment. She needed to apologize for. Hayes glanced past her toward the jet warming on the tarmac. "I thought the company handling this flight was fairly prominent." "Oh, it is," my mother said, stepping closer to him. "Very up and coming. Nothing to do with our daughter." Of course, I felt something inside me shift. A click, a line cross, that couldn't be I should have walked away, but I stood there, hidden behind a column as my mother went on, smoothing her blazer sleeve like she was sweeping crumbs off an expensive table. Dad chimed in with a quiet laugh, the kind he used when he wanted to seem modest while bragging. "She never quite fit our world," he said. "Some people just don't have the discipline for real business." Real business. My company, my aircraft, my employees, all erased in one sentence. For years, I'd tried to earn respect. I'd sent them newsletters, invited them to milestones, offered small windows into my world, hoping stupidly that one day they would look at me and see someone worth being proud of. And here they were, standing 15 feet from the jet I owned, preparing to board a flight I was personally overseeing, telling the client they desperately wanted to impress that I was nothing. I stepped back, letting the anger settle into something colder, clearer. Tessa, my closest friend and operations director, noticed the tension in my shoulders. "You okay?" "No," I said calmly, "but I will be." That afternoon, I reviewed every detail of the flight myself. The linens, the catering, the prep cruise notes. Every inch of that jet reflected the standard I had built from scratch. And as I walked down the aisle, touching the leather seats, the polished wood trim, the small touches we'd become known for, something hardened inside me. The next time my parents talked about me, like I didn't matter, they would be doing it in the cabin of the company they pretended didn't exist. I didn't need revenge. The truth would handle that for me. And as fate would have it, the truth was only one flight away. I arrived at the private terminal hours before the flight, long before my parents' car would snake up the curb with that familiar self-importance glinting off the tinted windows. If I was going to face them, it wouldn't be as their daughter, the one they sculpted and criticized and diminished. It would be as the woman I built myself into, piece by piece, late night by late night, mistake by mistake, victory by victory. My staff moved around me efficiently. The prep team whispered final confirmations. Catering loaded the last trays. The pilots reviewed their checklists with calm familiarity. No one knew the personal storm heading their way, and I kept it that way. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about truth, finally refusing to stay quiet. I stood at the terminal entrance just as the black sedan pulled up. Even from behind the glass, I could see my mother's posture. Perfect poised, chin tilted just enough to signal perceived superiority. My father stepped out first, smoothing his suit jacket like he was entering a boardroom. Vivan followed her heels, clicking in a rhythm I knew by heart. And beside them, stepping out last, was Leonard Hayes, rolling an overnight bag and already speaking about the agenda for Zurich. They were mid-conversation when Hayes asked something that made my mother stop walking. "Will your daughter be joining us today?" His voice carried through the glass even before the doors opened. My mother sighed lightly, the way she did when she wanted to sound patient but superior. No. She works at the airport. Not in aviation, just the airport. She said it with a soft shrug, like my life was a mild inconvenience she hoped he wouldn't notice. And then she added with a half laugh that could cut skin, "We try not to mention it." My father nodded in agreement, that subtle shake of his head that said, "What can you do with children like that?" Hayes didn't respond. Instead, he looked up and saw me standing there. When the sliding doors opened, a gust of cold morning air swept around them. Hayes stepped forward first, His eyebrows raised in genuine recognition. "You must be Maya," he said, offering his hand warmly. "The CEO?" My mother froze. My father blinked, confusion stretching across his face like someone had switched the language mid-sentence. I smiled politely. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes. Welcome to our terminal. We're honored to handle your trip today." Hayes gestured toward my parents. "They told me you worked at the airport. I didn't realize you owned the aviation company." My mother's grip on the champagne flute loosened. The glass slipped slow motion like gravity was savoring the moment before it shattered against the marble floor. The sharp crack echoed through the terminal. Every head turned. My mother didn't bend to pick it up. She didn't breathe. She just stared at me like she'd seen a ghost wet in my face. My father was quicker to recover, though his voice wavered. "Maya has been involved with aviation for some time," he said, choosing each word carefully. "We're very proud." The lie was so easy. It almost impressed me. Hayes looked between them, reading everything. The panic, the scramble, the unraveling of a narrative they'd protected for years. "Well," he said, "you should be. She runs an exceptional operation." I motioned toward the tarmac. "Shall we board? The crew is ready for you." As we walked toward the jet, my parents drifted behind, whispering to each other with rapid, clipped panic. I stayed beside Hayes. His curiosity seemed to sharpen with each step. "So, this is your new," he asked as we approached the gleaming jet. "It is," I said. "Long range, quiet cabin, customized interior. The membership clients love it. And you built this company from scratch." "Yes." "Impressive," he murmured. "Very." Behind us, my mother missed a step in her heels. Inside the cabin, the space glowed with soft lighting and polished surfaces. Hayes moved through with genuine interest, touching the seat leather, inspecting the conference space, noting the service touches. My parents followed mechanically, looking around like the walls might suddenly accuse them of something. When we settled into the seating area for pre-flight briefings, my parents ended up across from me and Hayes. The arrangement felt too poetic to be coincidence. Years of emotional distance turned into physical placement. Hayes leaned forward. "Tell me, Maya, what inspired you to start a private aviation company?" I didn't sugarcoat it. I worked in operations for years. I saw gaps pricing that made no sense, service that was inconsistent, communication failures. I wanted something better, more transparent, more human. He nodded approvingly. "Exactly what drew me to your proposal." My mother cleared her throat. "We always knew Maya had potential," she said, her voice tight. "We encouraged her." I looked at her. "Really looked? Did you?" I asked gently. Her mouth opened, then shut. Hayes caught the tension instantly. "Encouragement is important," he said diplomatically, "but vision that comes from within." My father shifted uncomfortably. But Hayes was already turning back to me. "Your financial model impressed me the most. That membership structure? Brilliant. Thank you," I said. "And your expansion timeline?" he prompted. "We're preparing for international operations," I replied. "This flight will give us crucial data for scaling." My mother's hand trembled around the replacement glass the attendant had given her. She set it down before she dropped the second one. Somewhere around cruising altitude, the conversation turned toward future contracts. Hayes grew more enthusiastic with each detail I outlined. Routes, capacity, projected ROI. My parents listened in silence, cornered by a truth they could no longer reach. Finally, Hayes sat back and said, "I'd like to expand our partnership. All executive travel, not just this trip." My mother swallowed hard. My father blinked. I kept my voice steady. "We'd be honored to handle it." He smiled. "You know, your parents talked about you as if you were lost. I see someone who built her own sky." My mother's breath caught. My father looked away. The jet descended into Zurich through soft clouds. And when the wheels touched down, the moment felt bigger than landing. It felt like years of silence meeting the ground. After we disembarked, Hayes stepped into his waiting car, but not before shaking my hand firmly. "You've built something extraordinary," he said. "Don't let anyone, family or not, tell you otherwise." My parents lingered behind on the quiet tarmac. For the first time in my life, they were the ones unsure of how to speak. Vivan approached first. "Maya, why didn't you tell us I did?" I said softly. "You never listened." Everett looked at me. Expression unfamiliar. Less certainty, more reckoning. "We misjudged things. Not things I said." "Me." Silence stretched. The wind moved between us. "We'd like to fix this," my mother said, voice cracking somehow. I nodded slowly. "Maybe, but first you'll need to understand something. They waited. I don't need your approval anymore, but I won't accept your disrespect." Edward swallowed. Vivon looked away. "We hear you," he said. "I hope so." I turned toward the terminal. "Enjoy your trip. My team will take care of you." I didn't look back. For the first time, they had to follow my lead. In the weeks after that flight, everything moved fast. Contracts, meetings, expansion plans, but emotionally, things moved slower, like my life was recalibrating after a long storm. Hayes finalized the expanded partnership within days. His team praised our service, our transparency, our efficiency. The deal brought in new clients almost immediately. Executives who'd heard the story, though no one repeated the details out loud. Success has a way of speaking for itself. Back at headquarters, my team celebrated with the quiet pride of people who knew how hard we'd fought to get here. When I walked into the office that Monday morning, they'd filled the lobby with small paper airplanes. Each one scribbled with a note. "Proud of you. We're with you. You did this." I kept one on my desk. My parents stayed silent for almost 2 weeks. Then, on a gray Thursday afternoon, I got an email from my father. Not a lecture, not an argument, just, "We'd like to talk when you're ready." I wasn't sure I ever would be. But healing isn't a straight line, so I agreed to meet them for coffee in the city. They were different this time. Less polished, less certain. My mother didn't comment on my outfit. My father didn't ask about real jobs. Instead, they listened. Really listened. They asked about the company, the team, the flights. They were apologies. Not perfect, not complete, but real enough to soften something inside me without erasing the past. We weren't fixed. We weren't suddenly close. But for the first time, the distance between us wasn't a wound. It was a boundary, one I finally knew how to hold. Back at the airport that night, watching a jet lift into the sunset, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because they'd changed, but because I had, and the sky finally felt like mine. Looking back, people always assumed the moment of power was when the champagne shattered or when Hayes asked if the company was mine, but the real shift happened later. Quiet, steady, when I realized I no longer needed to fight for a place in a family that never made room for me. I built my own space, my own sky, and invited in only the people who valued it. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or talked about like you weren't in the room, I hope my story reminds you that you're allowed to rise anyway. You're allowed to build something they can't ignore. If this story hit home for you, share your experience in the comments and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next, because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's justice wrapped in grace. Silent revenge.